In this video, I'm going to be showing you the very simple tips and tricks to getting started with watercolor. So what you are going to need, you're going to need a set of watercolors. So for instance, this is just a very cheap set of watercolors that we use in the classroom, and this works just as well. In fact, my brand or preferred brand of watercolor is Prang, and I use these for pretty much all of my watercolor paintings, and they have done me very well. So yeah, you're going to need watercolor. You're going to need a watercolor brush, which you can actually buy official watercolor brushes that are nice for watercolors. You can also use the brushes that come with these sets, and all you're really looking for is a nice soft bristled brush. You also are going to need some paper towel for drying, and then you are going to need water as well. It's actually best if you have 2 cups of water, but for this it doesn't really matter. So the one thing that a lot of people mess up with whenever they do watercolor is you need to paint with the water and not the paint. And this is something that a lot of people don't quite understand. So if you have a palette that you can actually rub your colors off into, that would be best. However, with me, I don't have a palette right now, so I'm just going to use the opposite side of the palette right here. And as you can see, whenever you add some water to the color, I didn't just put it in there and scoop it out. I actually added a little bit of water onto the paint, rolled my paintbrush around in it, and that picked up some pigment on the bristles, and I can use that to paint with. So this is how you mix colors. You just pick up whatever colors you want, put them off to the side, and if you want to get another color, for instance, if I want to make this more green, you rinse off your brush, dry it, and then go into, get your brush wet again, go into your green, wet it down, roll your paintbrush around, and you picked up that pigment again. So now you have kind of a bluey green or a blue green. I can do that again. Just make sure we don't transfer colors back and forth. And as you can see, the color is starting to change. Now, if you go straight into it like this, where you are mixing the colors and you go straight back into your other colors, you can muddy the colors up, and you don't really want to do that. Okay, so what are we going to do with this now that we know how to mix colors and use the colors? Well, watercolor, there's 2 different methods of using it, and we're going to spend today as a way to test out different methods of using watercolor. The first method is going to be a wet on wet technique, where you basically just take some water, put it down on your canvas somewhere. So for instance, mine is going to be right here, and I'm going to draw a box around it so we can see it. The wet on wet technique. So let's see. Okay, wet on wet, and as you can see, I already got some watermarks on there. But the wet on wet technique is right here. And what that does is if you go into some colors, say this kind of blue-green, and you put it down right here, you can see that the color is starting to spread out. And that's what the beautiful thing with watercolors is. You can actually just go in, start adding in some colors, and watch them spread out into each other and see what happens. So for instance, we have blue, a little bit of blue-green, and I'm going to go into the green right here. Roll it around. And as you can see, they're already starting to mix. Now, if you want to help this process along, all you have to do is just clean your brush off, go back in there, and you can kind of push these colors together. And that will create a wet on wet effect. Okay, the next thing that we're going to be looking at is a wet on dry. So we're taking a wet paint and putting it on a dry surface. So let's go ahead and do that right here. Wet on dry. So what we're doing, this is completely dry. We have not watered that down at all. And I'm going to go straight into my colors here, roll it around with my blue, and this way you can see what it looks like. So as you see, we can make really nice, crisp, sharp lines. And where the water is wet down at the bottom, we can actually use that to our advantage. So we can take that like that, use a little bit of water, and we can add it right down to the bottom. So this is taking a little bit of both the wet on dry and the wet on wet and kind of mixing it together to make really cool effects. And as you can see, we kind of have a little bit of a mountainscape right there. Okay, the next thing that I want to show you, and this is how to create a really sharp, crisp line. So how you do that, you get your brush, load it up with some paint, and you don't want to have a whole lot of water in it. So if you can, just soak up any of the excess that you have on a paper towel like that. You can see how it's soaking it up. And now you should have just enough water and pigment on your brush that you can use that to create a really sharp line. So with this, you're going to be using more pigment and less water. And as you can see, you can create a really nice sharp line. Perfect for signatures. Or if you want to add in little details like birds. Okay, that is the techniques for watercolor. So wet on wet, you take water, put it down, add in your colors, and it's wet on wet, and it makes a nice little transition. Wet on dry is wherever you have dry paper and you take your brush and you have it loaded up with water and pigments and go into it. And then you have the dry point effect where you just take very little water and mostly pigment and just put it on there. So let's add that in here. And that is your all's assignment. All of you will have art paper meant for painting, and you're going to be using today as a way to test out and try out different types of watercolor effects. So use today to try this out. Don't muddy up your paints because we are going to be sharing these paints. As you can see, I barely used any of these paints at all. And how you clean up your watercolors, it's very easy. You just run your brush under some water and it's cleaned up. That's all you have to do. Run it under some water, dry it out, that's it. With your palettes, all you have to do, take some paper towel, soak it up, run it over it, and it's dry. Do not clean out your wells or you're going to take all of your pigment and it's all just going to go away. This will dry up on its own. So that is how you clean it up. All right. I can't wait to see how you all produce. Those are the basic steps in watercolor.